Welcome to all of you. Welcome to all of you who want to join us for today's IL Expert Online Forum. Publishing is key. Publications are key for career advancement, for successful application, for third-party funding, for successful promotion, for the status of one's own person in the scientific community. But the question is, where best to publish and which routines and practices to acknowledge and respect? These very general and many more fine-grained and concise questions I'd like to discuss with three experts in the next 30 minutes, followed by up to 1 hour of questions asked by the audience. So ever so briefly, I would briefly like to introduce our three experts. And our three experts represent different generations, different continents, different specializations within English and general linguistics. And they also differ with regard to their backgrounds in journal, book, and book series publishing. I will introduce our experts in alphabetical order, going by the surnames. So B stands for Laurel. So welcome, Laurel from Vancouver. Laurel, I think, doesn't need an introduction as a scientist and English linguist, Professor Emerita at UBC. She is simply a towering figure in English historical linguistics, especially in historical pragmatics, grammaticalization, and lexicalization. In terms of editorial experience, apart from the many books that she has edited in the past, she is the co-editor of the journal English Language and Linguistics. She was also on the editorial, one of the editors of the Journal of Historical Pragmatics for a number of years. Another Professor Emerita is Merja Kytö, not at UBC, however, but at Uppsala University. And most importantly for our society, Merja will be our president from next summer onwards, so summer 2025. So she is our president-elect. And she also has a strong background in English historical linguistics, especially also corpus-based historical linguistics, language variation and change, historical sociolinguistics, and pragmatics, as well as manuscript studies and research ethics. In terms of editing experience, Merja is, among other things, editor of Cambridge University Press's studies in English language. She is also an editor, a co-editor of the ICAME journal, a co-editor-in-chief of Studia Neophilologica, and the editor of the yearbook of the Royal Society of the Humanities at Uppsala. And finally, there is Georgia with us from UC Davis. Georgia Zellou is an associate professor there. She specializes in phonetics, speech perception, and laboratory phonology. Most importantly, for this expert forum, she has served as co-editor-in-chief of the journal Linguistics Vanguard since 2019. Well, and perhaps I should mention that I myself also have some background in editing. So I've been a book series editor of topics in English linguistics for almost 30 years, for another book series, Dialects of English, for some 10 years. And I've been an editor or co-editor of English Language and Linguistics for about a dozen years. So whenever the other three don't know what to say, I think I can still chip in and come in with some answers and reactions and comments myself. So in the next 25 to 30 minutes, I will discuss a number of questions with our experts, questions that all four of us considered as a good opening of this topic beforehand when we discussed this in a brief meeting a few days ago. And thus, we try to prepare the ground for the more specific, perhaps also more general questions that the members of the audience will have in the general Q&A. Since I mentioned the general Q&A, so we will stop recording after roughly the first half hour. So once there is only this interaction that I have had with the three experts and that the three experts have had among themselves. So we will not record the general Q&A, so you will have a safe space there. And if you have any spontaneous questions in connection with things that you hear in the next 25 to 30 minutes, please don't hesitate to write a question in the chat so that I can immediately include this question. Sophia, who is also managing things in the background here as IO's web administrator, Sophia may also alert me to something in the chat that I may have missed, but then that should be made part of the discussion. Okay, so let's start our discussion among the experts, and I would like to start with a question: how to decide whether to offer a research article to a journal's special issue, or to, for instance, a book series, or let's say a collective volume in a book series. Laurel, any ideas on this?
Okay, so obviously, journal editing is the gold standard, and that's because it tends to be more rigorously reviewed. But there's, of course, also the greater likelihood of rejection. It's not to say that special issues and collected volumes are not edited. They tend generally to be edited, and they're perfectly respectable places to place articles. Special issues, especially if they're issues of very well-established or tier 1 journals, are extremely prestigious as well. I've sat on many tenure and promotion committees, and I've never seen anyone raise the issue of whether the article appears in a special issue or not a special issue of a journal. And also with special issues, there might be the additional respect you have in being invited to contribute to the special issue. So journal articles, as I said, the gold standard, but special issues are extremely good as well. Collected volumes, I think, are fine, especially if they're printed by a respected publisher. I think the only problem there is there may be questions about the review process, because if it looks like it's just conference proceedings, it may be questioned whether the articles were blind reviewed, and so that could be a question, but I think that's not so common in our field. I think most collected volumes are reviewed as well. So I think all three choices are perfectly fine, and you may want to start with journal articles, but you could certainly contribute to special issues or to collective volumes. I think part of it has to do with your the stage you are in your career, and this may come up in the next set of questions. I think in my own career, I tended at the beginning of my career to publish journal articles, but then I got more and more sort of invitations to contribute to special issues or to contribute to volumes. And so I moved sort of away from journal articles, but this was simply how things worked out in my career. I think it didn't really say anything about what is the best way of placing your articles. So I think that's what I want to say to get things started, and then maybe turn it over to Bernd and Merja to talk about the next few questions.
Yeah, you mentioned already the relevance of the career stage, for instance, in taking such a decision where to publish my research article. Maybe this career stage is also important in the question, should I publish an article or should I publish a series of articles vis-a-vis, should I publish a book? Is this something still worth doing? So Merja, do you have any opinions on this career stage and article, or even a book? My PhD thesis, a book or a series of articles?
Yeah, that is a very, very important question to consider. And I think Laura's career was very illustrative of what happens to most people, that in the early career stage, it's somehow easier to tackle articles. I mean, you've just finished a huge book, your PhD, unless you've done a cumulative thesis. So it's somehow easier to manage with shorter term projects. Books tend to take quite a lot of time. It's several years often, and you need some entries to your CV. And that's why articles or special issue articles are usually very handy. Also, one has to think about funding. I mean, you need uninterrupted time for book projects. It may be easier to work on articles when you are at the same time if you're teaching or doing some other work. So one has to look at the circumstances and count them in. I've noticed that the length of the papers can be more limited in journals. So if one has a bigger article in mind, it might be easier to go for a collected volume. Then you mentioned this collecting or writing a series of articles. And that is also something that people do nowadays, that you write 3-4 articles and then you collect them into a book with revisions, so maybe larger data sets. And as long as your articles are elaborated on and sort of rewritten, it's fine. Some publishers make a case of not wanting to reproduce too much of earlier articles.
Mm-hmm. Right. You mentioned the term cumulative thesis, and this is something perhaps that is better known only in a sort of continental European context, perhaps less in an Anglo-American context, or also in other parts of the world. So at least in continental Europe, it's also possible to do your PhD not as a book, but rather to submit, let's say, 3 or 4 articles that are single authored, sometimes also co-authored, but with a PhD student as the first author. And then you have this collection of articles that you then provide with a kind of umbrella text when you submit this as a PhD thesis. But in the end, you actually submit the core chapters, let's say, of this PhD thesis to rigorous peer review in a journal. And you really need for your home institution to show that your submissions have been accepted for publication. Okay. Sometimes there's really a difficulty to decide, should I do it that way, or should I do it the traditional way, that I rather sort of submit my PhD thesis and perhaps also publish this as a book later on. I can only say from experience here, because for many years I've been also the head of our PhD committee for the humanities and social sciences in my university. Very often people get frustrated in the process because the peer review process may really take very long. And then at a certain point, there is a point of exhaustion reached where people then rather say, oh, let me rather submit this as a PhD thesis, and let's see whether I can perhaps also leave some interesting stuff for an extra article, but this PhD thesis I can really also publish as a book, for example. So I just wanted to say, when you make this decision, at least review your decision after 2 or 3 years, because otherwise people really run into time problems. And then you run into funding problems also, as Merja mentioned, because typically you, at least in the German context, you have a maximum of 3 years funding. In other countries, it's rather 4 years. But anyway, if you rely too much on peer review publishing for your cumulative PhD thesis, you may run into deep water there very soon. Okay, we have another set of questions that I think is perhaps also very central for everyone who wants to publish. And this is the question: how do I determine the optimal fit between my research, my own research, and the journal or the book series I'm offering my research and research article to. Georgia, any thoughts on this?
Yes, great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that one would want to consider is the scope of the journal. So the first thing one would want to do is do some research on the journals in an area, in a field. Journals nowadays can be general linguistics journals and more specific specialized journals to a specific area, like a phonetics journal or a pragmatics journal or a sociolinguistics journal. So the question is kind of like, what's the readership of the journal? So who would you want sort of reading your work? Is your work really something that's more for a specialized audience? Or is it something that you think is relevant even to people beyond your one specific area? And that's kind of one question that one sort of conversation you have with yourself when you're looking at the kinds of journals that you're considering. So once you sort of make that decision, is it sort of, do you want to aim for a general linguistics journal or a more specialized journal? Kind of finding that fit involves first looking at the editorial board, right? So the editorial board are the editors-in-chief and the action editors, the associate editors. So these are the people who will actually be handling your paper, reading your paper first, deciding what reviewers will review your paper, and ultimately making the final decision on whether to accept your paper or the process that your paper will go through in consideration for that journal. And so if this is like your specialty journal, your specialty field, you should recognize those names, right? If you recognize those names, if they're doing work that's related to what you're doing, that's a good sign, right? So you want to find that sort of familiarity. You want to be recognizing these people. Another way to sort of consider what is the journal that you should be considering is thinking about what are the articles that you're citing, right? So as you're writing your journal, as you're writing your paper, as you're building up your motivation for your study, who are the people who you're citing and where are they publishing? Again, if there's overlap, if there's familiarity, if you're citing papers that have been published in that journal that you are submitting your article to, that's a very good sign, right? That means that the readership will be of interest to that readership. It's within the scope of that journal. This can be trickier for general linguistics journals because again, it's kind of broader. But these are the kinds of things you can consider when identifying sort of that good fit. Also nowadays, I mean, there's lots of journals, lots of different venues, and they have some journals have specifications at the types of articles they accept. And so this is something you should consider also. So sometimes you write an article and it's very, very long, right? So it's like 14,000 words. Some journals say this is good. These are the kind of articles we accept, original research papers of this, length, a typical journal article length. Some journals now are having shorter papers. So for instance, this is the case with Linguistics Vanguard, the journal that I'm co-editor in chief for. Our papers, we have like a 4,000 word limit on our papers. Sometimes that's exactly the kind of paper you're writing, right? Sometimes it's like, sort of, cutting edge, just want to get, sort of bite size, we call it bite size kind of paper. And so, I mean, this is something you could even think about before you start writing your article, right? Is this, a 14,000 word article covering a huge expanse of literature, or is it just sort of like a bite-size article? And that's, again, going to determine, does the journal that you're thinking of allow articles of that type, right? Sometimes journals also accept review articles. That's also another way, if you're considering like to get sort of into the publishing game, is to think like, what are the journals that allow for review articles? Look at review articles in those journals and thinking about, as you're if maybe you want a shorter, original research article and maybe a longer review article, if you've done if you're writing your dissertation, sometimes we write massive reviews of literature, and that by itself could be a contribution to some journals. So really thinking about scope, alignment between you recognizing the people who are going to be handling your submission, and the works that you cite and that journal, and also the type of papers that those journals are looking for. So considering all of these things is kind of it's kind of like an art, choosing the right journal to submit to. Sometimes it's happened to me. I submit a paper to a journal and sort of get like a desk reject or a rejection saying, oh, this is not within the scope of our, I disagree, but they see it that way. So it can be kind of a, really finding that right fit is a good practice, something to be thinking about.
These are very good guidelines already to avoid a desk reject, let's say. Laura, you also want to come in on that point?
I just wanted to say that there's typically lots of information on the journal website, maybe a mission statement about what sorts of articles they're interested in, information about length. And so all of that information is available usually on the journal website. I want to agree with Georgia that a nice way of trying to figure out what kind of journal is to look at the journals that of the articles that you cite. That's often the way. And when we desk reject something, I might say, well, this is not appropriate for our journal, and I'll look at the articles that the person has cited and see that they appear in a particular type of journal. And so I'll say, this is not appropriate for our journal, but you might consider one of these journals. So that's very good way. I also want to talk about sort of tier 1 versus tier 2 type of journals. I think the temptation or the desire is always to send your article out to, the best journal in the field. And of course, that's nice, but there are many very respectable journals that are not, the absolute tier 1, published by very respected publishers in the field, and they are very suitable places to put papers. So don't always try for the absolute tier 1 journal necessarily, especially I think in your initial stages of your career. You can consider, very good journals, smaller journals, more niche journals, as long as they're published by known publishers in the field, Cambridge University Press or De Gruyter or Benjamin's. They publish many journals, and so look at the publishers' websites and see what kinds of journals are published by the sort of major journal publishers in the field.
There's a question in the chat whether the process will be faster in a tier 2 journal compared with a tier 1 journal.
No. Yeah, I know. It really depends on the editors and how things are working at the journal.
All right.
Yeah, publication can be as quick as a few months. That's like a miracle, or as long as years, literally. Years. Unfortunately. And unless you really have published before or really have a clear sense, sometimes special collections, there's a clear guideline. There's very little you'll know ahead of time about how long it will take. And even, it's always a crapshoot, so to speak.
Yeah, you actually mentioned, have a look also at the publishers of journals, for instance, tier 1, tier 2, but then of course we have really a kind of mushrooming of journals these days, and we have increasingly predator journals. Is there a safe way of recognizing the one from the other? Because a predator journal will offer me the opportunity of publishing very quickly, typically, if I pay as well, probably.
It's very tempting. It's very tempting. I think, again, following the same rule of thumb that I'm describing, you really want to look at the editorial board. If you recognize those people, that is a good sign. If those people are reputable, if they are publishing, that is a good sign. and look at who has published there, right? If people who are publishing there are reputable and all that stuff. Those are kind of the good rules of thumb. Another, like, if you get an email from a journal saying, super fast publication, we want you, just $1,000, like that. Yeah, that's a sign that it's not, like, typically, unless like you're getting invited from an individual saying, I know you and I would like you to publish in this special collection, like, unless you get an invitation that's really, again, legit, you should be very wary of emails. So again, sort of following the pathways of what are the articles that I respect, that I think are like really great? Where are those articles published? Who are the researchers who I respect? Where are they publishing, over the last 5 years or so? That's really the best kind of rule of thumb. And it's worth it to follow that and to publish in the journals where people who you respect publish in, because then you are alongside them. You're part of the conversation with them. People who are publishing in journals read those journals. So you want to be in conversation with those individuals. If you're going to publish in a journal where you don't recognize anyone who's on the editorial board or anyone who's publishing in those journals, you're not in conversation with people who you want to be in conversation with.
So let's return to the tier 1 and tier 2 journals. And now you received the reviewer report, I hope after at least 3 months or so. So how best to deal with reviewers' reports, with decisions that you have to revise your manuscript, or that even your manuscript is subject to substantial revision? How best to handle such a reviewer report?
Yeah, so there's a couple options, right? So the typical side is you submit your paper, it goes through admin checks, an AE, like an editor, gets assigned, the AE assigns it, sends it out to reviewers, reviewers accept. All of this is a very long process, right? And people could, sit on it for a few weeks. It means nothing about the quality. If it takes the length of time, don't interpret the length of time that it takes to get a decision back. If it takes a very long time, it just could be that things are being held up at every stage. And what you'll get is a decision from the action editor or the associate editor. And that decision will probably summarize the reviewer reports, and you'll get both sort of a summary or even specific comments from the editor, and then you'll get specific comments from all the reviewers. So if there's a couple options here. One is it's a reject. So if it's a reject, don't consider that like a failure or anything that's terrible. I mean, what you want to do is you want to read really carefully what the reviewers and the editor are saying, and you want to consider what to do. Are they pointing out things that you can rework or you can revise, and then do that. That's actually, think of it as very helpful. If it's another option is a revise and resubmit. So that's great. That's like foot in the door. That is a very good option, a revise and resubmit. And what you want to do is you want to read through the comments, all of the comments, very, very carefully and objectively, right? So I remember when I was, first going through this process and people are saying very, very critical things about my work, it can feel like a personal attack, right? That's kind of the common emotional reaction is, oh, they're criticizing me. But now what I really do is when I get reviewer responses, I get really excited because it's like another like really, really smart person who is basically giving me some of their intellectual time and energy. And under most circumstances, it's very constructive. It's very, helpful. And I want to sort of use that and leverage that to make my paper better. And so you want to really think carefully about what reviewers are saying, and to the extent that you can, really respond to as much of their comments as possible. Sometimes there are misunderstandings, right? So if a reviewer is sort of criticizing something that you feel is unfair, that could be a legitimate misunderstanding. And then the burden is on you to sort of clarify that, restructure, rethink, redo if necessary, to really address so that your paper is as clear as possible.
Yes, also, I mean, typically you have together with your revised article, you have a response to the decision letter, and there you are typically also encouraged to make clear where you disagree with comments in the reviewer reports, because there may really be misunderstandings. So you don't have to do everything that is actually suggested in reviewer reports. You can give your own arguments where you disagree. So I mean, that's also another way of engaging, then seriously engaging with the feedback that you received.
Yeah, it's
I would
like a
also,
conversation.
Yeah,
I would
Laura?
also say, you know, feel free to communicate with the editor if you don't, before you do your revisions or in the process of doing your revisions. And if you find reviewers' comments puzzling or difficult, or you really object to them, you can communicate with the editor. The editor probably has already told you, you know, sometimes reviews are contradictory, and it's the editor's job to say, well, you know, I think the reviewers maybe don't, one reviewer doesn't understand, or, you know, so the editor should have done that, but maybe the editor hasn't, and you have conflicting advice from the two reviewers. Do feel free to communicate with the editor. I find that authors don't do that, and maybe they feel that they shouldn't, but I would encourage it, that you communicate with the editor that you're maybe having some trouble with a reviewer's comments, and ask their advice what you should do. So
Yeah, sometimes, and that's part of it, right? Sometimes you get reviewers who are just like, I tell my students, like, it's like they're asking for a chimera or something like that. Like reviewer one's asking for a snake and reviewer two is asking for a lion, right? And you have to be like, but I wrote a bunny, right? Like you have to sort of, you know, it can be, it's kind of like a dance, right? This tension between, there's also like, it is, at the end of the day, it is your paper, right? And that can be hard because reviewers are like, I wish you wrote this other paper and here's how I want you to revise it, right? And it's kind of an art between like figuring out both like how to like appease reviewers, objectively try and understand how they are trying to make your work better, and how your work can improve from their feedback, but then also making sure your paper is still your paper, right? It still is your paper. And this will take it takes negotiation. It takes kind of really stepping back and thinking about what reviewers are saying, whether objectively what they're saying can help you, or whether you disagree, and that will take some internal, like, talking through it to yourself. And if need be, then yeah, reaching out to the editor is absolutely something that you should do in that case.
I think that the worst case scenario is where you really feel that the reviews are unfair and you can't address them. So what do you do in those cases? You can withdraw the paper. If you do so, you have to communicate that clearly to the editor. The editor has invested a lot of time, reviewers, and has invested time in sort of imposed upon the goodwill of reviewers to review. So there's a lot of investment by the journal already in your paper. So withdrawing at that stage is really something you should think about seriously, but sometimes that's the only option. But make clear that you are doing that and why you're doing it, and tell the editor and thank them for, you know, all of the time and effort they have put into this, recognizing that they have put a lot of time and effort into it. So withdrawing is a possibility, but I think it should be really a last option. So that's and as I said, definitely tell the editor you're doing this. I had a case where I was working with an author on an article, this quite a well-known author, and the person decided to withdraw their paper, submitted it to another journal. I was asked by that other journal to review the paper. It's a small field. And I said, well, wait a minute, I'm working on this journal, this article for my journal. And so, of course, then the author said, oh, I just forgot to tell you. And, you know, but, you know, this did not create a good impression with me. So
yeah, there's a couple no-nos, really big, really big no-no. And this is really bad, because if you get a reputation for doing things that are big sort of unspoken no-nos in the field, that can really damage your future. So one is, yes, submitting the same or a similar paper to be considered for publication at the same time to different venues. That is an absolute no-no, again, because people are putting so much time and effort into reviewing your paper. If you're like shopping it around at the same time, that can be seen as just a faux pas. Another mistake is if someone's pointing out a mistake or putting time and effort into giving you feedback, and you don't address it, either in changing the paper or in responding to their comment. If you sort of just ignore some point that a reviewer has made, that can be seen as the reviewer could then come back and respond in a hostile way. So you really want to, even if you don't agree, you're allowed to disagree, but you really need to respond to all of the sort of major points. It just sort of gives a bad impression to ignore comments that are being made to you. And of course, using someone's words, ideas, or data without their permission, or submitting something that you've worked on with someone without them knowing, these are just like no-nos, just to make that clear, to be helpful.
So another option, I think, besides withdrawing, is to ask for another reviewer. I don't recommend that, because you're bringing a third person in or a fourth person in at a later stage. I had it just happen recently, and I brought in another reviewer who had an entirely new set of critiques and criticisms, quite extensive. And then now, of course, the authors have decided to withdraw the paper. And so I wouldn't really recommend that, but maybe it will work. But I think it's, again, a kind of last option. So
I have a number of questions lined up here, but there is one question in the chat that I would like to ask the experts, and then I think we can move to the open Q&A anyway. But I think, Laurel, there was one last point you wanted to make.
Oh, I was just saying, in your response to the reviewers, control your tone very carefully. I just dealt with a paper where the author actually addressed all of the reviewers' criticisms, but the tone that came through was sort of irritation at having to address some of these points. So you don't have to be obsequious, but you should, I think, make sure you're very polite, and that it doesn't come through that you're irritated or annoyed. So.
Yeah, the question in the chat goes back to one of the questions that we discussed earlier: how to determine the optimal fit between what I have to offer, what I want to publish, and finding the appropriate journal. And this is a question that I think is really pertinent, because what if you are engaged in what may be called interface research? Okay, so you are really working at an area, or in an area that's where two or three other bigger fields meet. So for instance, should I publish something on English language teaching? Okay, should I do this in an English linguistics journal? Should I do this in an teaching English as a second language journal? If I study attitudes, for instance, in teaching, where do I publish this? So is there any advice how best to determine which journal to offer this to? And in the worst case, what happens if you get rejections from both, because neither the one nor the other says this is appropriate for us?
I mean, I think following these rules of thumb should be useful too, right? Like if you're doing interface work, you're not the first person to do interface work. So seeing where do people who do interface work publish, right? Where are they, and like who are the people who are doing this kind of work? Like where are they editors? Where are they, sort of leading journals? That's kind of, again, helpful. I mean, another thing you can do is like work on that framing, right? Like when you're writing your article, kind of, if you're feeling like you're getting rejections back because, editors and reviewers just aren't saying like, this isn't within the scope of our journal. think about how you could, and this will make your work stronger and be better for the field, right? If you can think about how to make a stronger case for why people in one or the other discipline should care about this interface work, right? So I dealt with that once where we submitted a paper to it was a speech perception paper. So and we submitted it to Cognition, a psycholinguistics journal, and we get a lot of responses from psycholinguists saying, oh, if it's speech, it's too specialized. This should go in a speech journal, we're a psycholinguistics journal, right? And so we often deal with this kind of like, this isn't for us from these kinds of journals. And when we responded to the reviewers and we revised the paper, we had to put a lot of work in to reframe the paper and think, why should people who are not speech people, but who are doing general psycholinguistics work, why should they care about this? Like, that's the burden's on us to really like make that framing clear. And so, we were successful. We were really happy about it, and we got into the journal, and we got the paper published. And I feel like we're forging a path for more speech people to, you see what I mean? So I think it's an opportunity. You can think of it as an opportunity, right? How can I make the framing of this paper more clear that it is for people in this field? So yeah, I think we need more work like that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Georgia. Well, I suggest that we stop the recording at this point.